Welcome everyone to the MVP Guide to Protecting and Recovering Your SaaS Data. Adoption of SaaS applications continues to grow, and industry predictions indicate that 85% of corporate apps will be SaaS by 2025. With the increased adoption of SaaS and cloud services, it's important not to confuse availability with data recoverability. My name is Theresa Miller. I'm the Director of Technical Advocacy here at Cohesity, and today I am joined by one of our customers and a very special guest. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, yes. My name is Chris Dove. I'm the Enterprise Architect for Department of Finance, State of California.
I'm so glad you're here, and I'm excited for our audience today to learn a little bit more about your experiences with this topic.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, so Chris and I have a jam-packed agenda for you today. We're going to spend some time talking about some of the common misconceptions when it comes to SaaS and security risks as well as ownership of data. From there, we're going to talk a little bit about what SaaS applications will offer you when it comes to protecting your data. And then we'll wrap things up by talking a little bit about Cohesity Backup as a Service. We're going to talk about M365. I have a demo for you, and we're going to also talk a little bit about Salesforce. So let's dive in and talk about some of these misconceptions. So one of the things that's important to highlight is that security attacks can impact cloud too. In fact, according to a recent survey, 56% of organizations that have data in the cloud had an increased attack volume on that data. We're also seeing complexity of attacks increasing. Things such as data exfiltration attached to ransomware, for example, or more advanced social engineering around phishing attacks. Organizations are also seeing impact from the attack. In fact, in this case of this survey, 53% said this was the case. And then lastly, 67% of those surveyed were attacked by ransomware. Chris, can you talk a little bit about what your org is doing to be prepared?
Yes, Teresa. One of the things that my agency is doing is we're going over and reviewing our backup strategy. And one of the things that we've noticed is we're adding, or we're making sure that we address our security needs in our backup strategy, along with our backup strategy cloud readiness.
Yeah, so looking at these stats and listening to what you're sharing, it seems that what you're doing is necessary.
That's correct, yes.
Now, Chris and I are going to talk about some common challenges. These are things that have happened to us within enterprises we've worked in. And so, Chris, can you talk a little bit about point number one here?
Sure. So recently, my agency, we experienced a ransomware event. Part of that ransomware event, our users' data in their Microsoft 365 workloads, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams, the data was encrypted. After we realized that we were under attack by ransomware, we quickly activated our technology recovery plan. And part of our technology recovery plan, we recently just implemented Cohesity Data Protect. Once we activated the recovery process with Cohesity Data Protect, we were able to restore 2.5 terabytes of our users' data back to them in Microsoft 365 within 12 hours.
Sounds like your planning paid off. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about these other two examples as well. So in my case, I had an executive at an organization I worked at previously reach out because they deleted an email. And the unfortunate thing is that there were some decisions made not to leverage third-party backup in that case, and we were not able to get this email back. And then the third scenario here revolves around a customer record within our customer database. And again, different organization. And I think the thing that I really want to call out here is human error is common. And, nobody's doing anything intentional, but it happens, and it can create some really challenging recovery incidents for your IT teams. So now let's go ahead and transition over to what SaaS applications offer you. In this section, we're going to talk a little bit about M365. And from the start, I just want to call out, you're going to see that each application has different capabilities. There's no standard across the industry for SaaS applications. So I want to call that out here. So let's talk about Exchange Online first. I want to call out that you are getting data retention capabilities. These are policy-based and they're not backup. The other thing that's really important is if you look at your agreements, you're not going to find a recovery SLA. So keep that in mind. Now, if you choose to use these policy-based items, here are just some of the capabilities you get from the native tool set. For example, deleted accounts and mailboxes can only be retained for up to 30 days. And I know I've worked in enterprises and worked with customers that have requirements that really sometimes provide the need for you to keep that beyond 30 days. So something to consider, you lose that without a full backup. Deleted item recovery default is 15 days, max is 30 in Exchange Online. And when I was configuring systems in my Exchange on-prem days, we could set this up to as far as we were willing to pay for storage. So oftentimes that was like 90 days. And this functioned as a really great tool to handle one-off scenarios, empower the user, let them go back and look in their second stage recycle bin to recover information. And then the other thing you get within this tooling is litigation hold and retention policy. These are truly should be used for legal and compliance reasons. They're not backup. And there's also a 10-step process to get the data out if you were using this. And I just want to call out that the process is slow. I've personally run this for even just an individual user pulling out their data. I've had it run for 4 hours and then fail because the data set was too large. I had to reduce the size of the data set, run it again. And in the end, I didn't even have everything I needed. And so I think that's a consideration. While you're retaining your data for potentially forever with these, getting the data out is not going to adhere to any level of SLA to get that back in a timely manner. Chris, you actually had another option or scenario that you found where these native tools were not enough. Could you talk about that?
Sure. So one of the things that we experienced on doing our onboarding process from on-prem to Microsoft 365, specifically migrating our users' mailboxes to Exchange Online, we ran into a couple of issues where a couple of mailboxes were corrupted, or we were losing data out of those mailboxes, items out of those mailboxes. Prior to that, we've already implemented Cohesity Data Protect in the cloud and on-prem. So with that, we were able to recover those items that we lost and restore them into our users' new mailbox on the O365 platform.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting that migration can cause data loss. So I'm glad you were able to recover back to whatever point in time you needed for those users.
Yes.
All right, so now let's talk a little bit about M365 OneDrive and SharePoint Online data retention. Again, data retention is policy, not backup, and no guaranteed recovery SLAs. In terms of policy-based retention, you get the ability to store files and folders that are deleted for back as far as 93 days. The user can go back and recover those as needed. And then the admin can go to the site collection recycle bin for an additional 30 days. You also, with OneDrive, get the ability to, again, if configured, go back to a point in time as far back as 30 days. This was put in place for situations like ransomware, but I think as we've all learned more about ransomware often seeds itself further back than 30 days. So there's a really strong chance that this won't be enough. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about version control, because version control can be pretty powerful but it's up to your admin to decide how many versions you're going to be allowed to keep. And so think about like maybe that number's 10. If you have 10 versions, in theory, I think one might think you could probably go back 10 days or even older. But the reality is I've played around with this a little bit, working with a coworker of mine. And what we found is that if we were actively working in a document on the same day, we actually could very easily go through 10 versions even in a day. So it's not anything that's going to help you go back in time, but it is a great capability in general. In terms of this next one, we have Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft Teams also is data retention, and it's policy-based with no recovery SLA. It's a complicated tool. It's not just a single solution. It runs on many different Microsoft 365 and Azure services and has what should look familiar, the same capabilities of SharePoint and OneDrive. So Chris, you have leveraged the native options for OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. You went through a ransomware attack. How does your experience align with leveraging these native tools versus, say, using a third party like Cohesity?
Well, one of the things that we experience is that trying to recover with the native tools is very complex. There's multiple steps in there, and then it's still not 100%, like you mentioned. Ransomware can seed itself, multiple days back outside of your retention policy. But having Cohesity, we were able to go through the process of just finding the items that we need past the 30 days and then restore it with just a simple click or a checkbox, and our users have their data fairly quick.
That's a really great experience to share. I can't help but to think back when you talked about the number of users you have and the amount of data that you were able to recover in a very reasonable amount of time. So I think it was really good that you took the initiative to not only use what we just talked about here across the M365 native options, but use Cohesity.
Yes.
So when should enterprises consider a third party such as Cohesity? Chris, can you talk a little bit about point number 1 here?
Sure. So most SaaS applications do not allow or do not have recovery SLAs. And for my organization, that's key. That's critical for us, specifically with our mission critical data. So that's why we chose Cohesity just for those SLAs, being able to have those SLAs.
Yeah, and as I think back to just the couple workloads we looked at with M365 and Salesforce, that was common that recovery SLAs are not guaranteed. So taking that seriously has proven to be valuable for you, it sounds.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to also talk about long-term retention. So when you consider some of the native options only having capabilities that allow you to store information 30 days or back to 30 days, it's not unusual for organizations to need to keep that longer. So long-term retention options are helpful. They can also be stored off-site, which is another benefit. So gives you the opportunity to take it to a different cloud on the back end or to a colo of sorts to meet that enterprise requirement. Also, if you're leveraging a tool like Cohesity, it gives you access to data for exit planning and even migrations, like Chris was talking about. Mergers and acquisitions, when I talk about exit planning, I think that is a common use case where if some form of a company purchase happens and you need to bring that data together, having your own copy of that to help with moving it into that new org is beneficial. Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about point 4 here?
Sure. So for our organization, the ability to be able to manage both SaaS data along with on-premise data from a single administration console is key for us. Actually, it helps and aids us in our backup recovery strategy in eliminating data silos. So Cohesity is great at that.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing all of that. All right, so let's go ahead and transition to the last section of our presentation today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about Cohesity, and Chris is also going to share some thoughts here. So why do organizations like yours protect their SaaS solutions with Cohesity? For me, it's a few things. So it's all about simplifying your management of data. You have data as a customer in SaaS. You have it in hyperscalers in the cloud. You have it on-prem. You might even have it at the edge. So having a solution that can bring that all together is powerful. We also talked about the risk of cyber attacks, ransomware being one of the top ones. And unfortunately, backups are not necessarily immune from attack unless you have some form of immutability built into your snapshotting, and we can help with that. And then the last point that I would like to call out here is just you have the opportunity, if you go with our as a service, to eliminate CapEx, get out of purchasing hardware, and gain control over your infrastructure costs. So Chris, obviously your organization chose Cohesity. How does what I just shared align with your experience and decision-making process to choose Cohesity?
Yes. For us, Theresa, I mean, it's for it's simple for us. With the rise of ransomware attacks, which we just experienced, along with having very limited staff resources and the complexity of supporting both on-prem and SaaS data in the cloud, Cohesity Data Protect was the obvious choice for us. It also Cohesity also allowed us to decrease our backup administration overhead. So, and it gave us the ability from a single pane of glass to support both on-prem and SaaS environments, and then also increase our data security footprint by having immutable backups. Where before, I mean, now we're able to run our backups, whereas before our backups were running us.
I think that's a powerful statement, and I'm going to ask the audience to reflect on that. All right, so let's go ahead and transition here into a demo. So what you're seeing in my console here today is the Data Protect dashboard. And in this dashboard, we have several things I'd like to cue into. So one, you can check on your data usage, your regions that you're protecting to, as well as your protection status. Now, how did we get this started? Well, we started with sources, and you can see I have more than M365 being protected here today. I get some insights into things as they're working, get some notifications on some things I might need to check into. So a lot of value right here. Now, in terms of registration, it really is about taking the time to decide which region you'd like to, and which cloud you'd actually like to use. You can see we have many different AWS regions. I also have an Azure region in my tenant that I could also select. Now, my source is registered, and you can see the region here. I actually have Azure and AWS, but let's go ahead and edit just so you can see the settings in greater detail. So no connectors or anything required, just register and does some registration on the Azure side and put in your credentials and you're on your way. So now let's transition to data protection. So from a data protection perspective, I just clicked into my registered source and it took me straight into mailboxes here. And I have some ability to select everything. We have auto protect capabilities as well. Now let's take a look at OneDrive. So you're going to see the same list of users, and I've made some choices to protect some, not protect others. But let me show you how easy it is to protect. So I choose the user, I click protect, you can see my region, and then I can put a policy on it. So we're going to use my policy to back up every 6 hours and retain 2 weeks, but you can create your own to whatever your organization needs. From here, we can see we have control over start time, SLAs, and there are some additional settings around, for example, quiet times or blackout periods, maybe when I don't want this running, and then I can click protect. So now that that's running, I want to show you how to protect sites and also think about how similar what I'm doing in each of these workloads is. So the learning curve is light and it makes it really easy to get started protecting. So again, I'm going with the individual item, choosing that site. I chose my existing policy, just reviewing the settings and clicking protect. A lot of similarity here. We're going to go ahead and grab this team, the finance team, choose protect. Again, I could create a policy, but I'm going to use the one I started out with. You're going to see a lot of similarity of settings and additional settings. Choose protect. Now we're looking at groups. I'm going to grab a group, click protect. And again, you could do this for your entire batch. If you leverage our auto protect capability, it actually will account for users that you've removed and added. So there's, it can make it really, really easy to kind of get this running and then not have to worry about it until you have an incident. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and transition to recovery. In this particular case, we're going to choose Tony Stark. Notice that when I choose a protected mailbox, I get the choice to recover the entire mailbox, individual items. I could unprotect it, or if I wanted, if I didn't like the time frame of the last protection job, I could do a one-off protection as well by clicking Run Now. In my case today, we're going to go ahead and do a recover individual items. Again, lots of choice and granularity you have, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to stick with emails and folders. I put in the wildcard here, again, just so you'd have some robust information to review with me today. But I'm going to go ahead and choose 2 messages. And we're going to head over to the right here. And we also have the ability to choose the time. And if we had other locations that this was being stored, we'd have that choice as well. Each message can also have its own recovery point. I'm going to go ahead now and click Next. So in my situation for mailboxes, especially when it comes to individual items, the reason for doing the restore can vary. So we're going to look at what it takes to restore to a new location. Anytime I have something as little as 2 messages, if you restore that back to the mailbox, they can get lost in the shuffle pretty easily. So when you move toward new location, you have the ability to isolate that. You can review it with the user, or you can share it with a manager if that's the scenario, or even legal and compliance. Just take it off to a different mailbox and then share it if you're not using the other options that we talked about, the native ones for litigation, holding, compliance. So I filled in all of that information, and the task is now underway and the restore has begun. All right, so we have talked about so many wonderful things today. I just wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to draw in on some key takeaways from this session as you're thinking about how you want to plan to protect your SaaS applications. So 1, plan your recovery strategy around the enterprise SLAs that you need. 2nd, make sure that you can recover back to the recovery point that you need, as opposed to solely leveraging the native options. Make sure on point 3, I'm going to call out the fact that you're going to be able to improve your productivity if you have a single solution that can help with protecting these workloads. 4th, let's make sure you have the opportunity to ensure compliance and legal requirements. We give you options from the Cohesity side to protect these workloads in some of the major hyperscalers. We also have the ability to have you take that off-site, or long-term retention might be interesting. So we have that flexibility to offer you if you need it. And then being able to reduce your risk for access to immediate data, for exit planning, migrations, or any unexpected scenario, I think are key here. And if we think back to Chris's experience with ransomware, I think we really all should be taking recovery a little bit more seriously, because the unexpected can happen anytime. So with that, I just wanted to thank all of you for joining us for our session today. And Chris, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with our audience. It was just a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.